Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you have sent me by email at AskChrisShelton@gmail.com. Please don't leave questions for me in the comment section. That's definitely guaranteed to not get them to me because I don't scour the comment section anymore looking for comments or questions, rather. And so send them to me by email. You guys have been great about that as I've been stressing it. So thank you for that. And also, I will remind everybody that my Patreon supporters get to the top of the queue, and their questions, of course, can also be sent to me on the Patreon app. So, okay, this week I posted what I believe will be my final episode on the topic of Black Lives Matter and my problems with the ideology or organization of that and some of my concerns with it. I've talked with a number of people now. I'm satisfied that I've certainly gotten my chance to express my concerns while it's at the same time expressing my support for what's going on. So I hope you guys will check those out. And like I said, I don't expect that I'll be putting any more content on that particular topic together. I know most of you guys really liked it. Some of you guys didn't. And I don't know what to say. You know, I don't think anything I said was unfactual or wrong, because of course I wouldn't think that. So anyway, whatever, we will move on. I'm definitely deep in the land of MLMs right now, as I've been mentioning. So it's a weighty and fascinating topic, and very, very culty, by the way. Not a big spoiler alert there. So now let's go ahead and get on with your questions. We have some really nice non-controversial ones this week. Kevin Zay. The Mormon Church leadership has been using their powers of persuasion, so to speak, to get more members to wear masks and decrease noncompliance. From an ethical or moral standpoint, is it any better or any different when leadership in a high-control group uses their leverage for beneficial purposes, such as increased mask wearing amongst members? Thanks for the question, Kevin. And actually, this is really good. I'm glad you asked this because it gives me an opportunity to point out that the whole thing about high control groups, destructive cults, authoritarian groups, these things that we call these groups, these are not groups that are engaged 100% of the time in abusive behavior. There is good with the bad. Otherwise, no one would stay. People are only going to put up with raw, straight abuse. I mean, believe me, I know, for so long before they finally just have had enough and they have to question what they're involved in, or just get the hell away from it, for sure. But at least question, why is this, there's no good anymore in this. And that, in fact, is one of the reasons people start snapping out of it. So, is it a different, you asked from an ethical or moral standpoint, is it better or different? No, it's not any different or any better. We don't give more credit to, North Korea for providing electricity to its citizens. That's a thing that governments are supposed to manage and make sure is happening, or, whatever. In other words, things you expect and would take for granted from somebody is not something you need to. When an abusive person does it, we should not be going out of our way to, publicly laud them for that. And of course, this has happened, many times. I think there is the point that you want to reinforce positive behavior, but that's not really what I'm talking about with this sort of thing. There's no difference from a moral standpoint is really what I'm trying to communicate there. So the Mormon Church does care about its base, its people. I mean, that there's no question about it. They, it's a, I would say, God, I don't want to say mostly good. I mean, the Mormon practice has real issues and problems still, but it has mainstreamed a lot too. So I have acknowledged that, yet I still hold firm that these abusive behaviors that the Mormon Church engages in must continue to be exposed, and exposed more so even than the good work that they do, because you expect them to do good work. They're a church. They put themselves out there as an organization whose sole purpose is to, bring more people on board, have happier communities, happier lives for all of their members. So if you're going to be pushing that kind of rhetoric, then we're not going to be, applauding every single time you do something good, but we're definitely going to be pointing out the abusive behaviors. And there are truly abusive behaviors going on in the Mormon Church to this day. So, we got to talk about that stuff. Is it a good thing, of course, that, can we give any acknowledgement? Well, sure, of course we can. It's obviously a good thing that the leadership of the Mormon Church wants their, flock to survive this epidemic and are pushing, common sense really at this point, safety measures and social distancing measures and stuff like that. That of course, that's a good thing, I suppose in the world of Scientology, we've seen that with all their hysteria about cleaning everything. I'm pretty sure that they probably did go on a roll, because I'll tell you, if there's one thing Scientologists, and especially Sea Org members, know how to do, it's clean. Whole course that you take as part of your basics of getting into the Sea Org. I know you asked about the Mormons, but just to counter with another example of a high control, destructive, abusive organization that yet saw PR value in cleaning because that was one of its main go-tos. The Sea Org is constantly cleaning. As I understand it, it's kind of like that, in the Navy too. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I've been told various things, but, painting, cleaning, fixing stuff is just constant work. And it's kind of like that in the Sea Org, because cleaning, of course, and upgrades are a way to get, keep, a lot of people busy for periods, sometimes long periods of time. So I hope that answers your question. Cyprian Ivanov. In a video I saw recently, Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling talked about how a large number of letters and postcards criticized the episode where Lassie gave birth to puppies, saying they were sexualizing a family show. Serling thought the letter complaints were fake due to many having identical handwriting and postmarks, but the company decided to avoid further episodes on the issue. Why did that happen? Do you think it's plausible that the opinions of the far fringe is interpreted as the opinion of the masses due to availability bias? Due to the fear that such a dramatic reaction would only be the tip of the reactions from a body averse to open complaint? Does the previous business urge to be blandly agreeable to a general audience change now that companies are seeking specific market niches with rival social groups? Okay, thanks for the question, Cyprian. Let me break this down into two parts, because you've made two important points here about why did it happen that, the company, that the production television station would respond to complaints that by, taking down episodes of Lassie giving birth, or not producing any more content like that, not allowing any more content to be produced like that. That's one question. But then you also asked about the blandly agreeable, business urge. Does that change now that companies are seeking more specific market niches? So I'll address that last one first. No, I don't think companies in general are pursuing specific market niches as their only demographic. It just becomes, identities or demographics are all about what marketing is all about. And you can take the same product and you can communicate about it different ways to different markets or different demographics or different publics. This is what they were called in Scientology, is what Hubbard called it. So you have your construction worker public, and you have your secretary public, and you have your housewives public. I mean, these publics can cross over like Venn diagrams, but you identify the needs and wants and loves and hates and fears and hopes of these different groups through surveys and through, basically through a lot of surveys. And then you can also bump that up to focus groups and other techniques that marketing professionals use in order to figure out what do we need to say and how do we need to say it? How do we need to even frame it so that this product communicates that, to these people that they need and want this product. Now, obviously, not all products are universally marketable. Some things like, dish soap are not going to be marketed to, coal miners, right? So you do have different publics, and I suppose you could say different niches or niches. I really should have looked up how to pronounce that. First, you can have different markets for sure, different publics, but very few, the big companies, and here we're talking about getting into television stations, radio, entertainment. These are venues that are trying to attract the broadest possible audience. So now we sort of flip over to the first question you asked as to why did this happen? Why is it that networks or television or entertainment stations or media platforms will respond by, okay, there's this big complaint and we need to do something about that? Well, there's a few different levels of answer to this. It's actually can go quite deep, but to keep it simple and short, in terms of my thoughts on this, first I'll say that yes, there is a market fear. There is a fear of the market, turning on them, of losing product, of this becoming, it's small now, but there's lots of times when a small protest that was ignored or not acknowledged or not dealt with became huge and really overwhelmed companies, and in fact, sometimes has destroyed them. That has happened in history. So it's not like it happens every other day, but it happens, and companies are aware of this. And so crisis management, that's a thing. There's a whole profession involved with crisis management now, and various, sort of guidelines or checklists or steps that they follow in order to deal with problems, PR problems that the companies have created. So here you have a television station. Now, this is back in the 50s. This is Lassie. Rod Serling was making the original Twilight Zone in the 60s, 50s and 60s. So this is quite a while ago before these kind of things existed. So probably here, or at least that I'm aware of, I'm aware of crisis management and PR and this sort of stuff really taking off later. It being a subject back in the 50s for sure, but not as tailored or tuned or advanced as it is now. That's my understanding of it, but haven't done a deep dive on that particular topic more than what I usually talk about with it. So I think there was a fear response here. I think that they were like, oh my God, people interpreted it this way. Oh no, right? And if these people are talking about boycotting the television station, well, those kinds of things were kind of sensational. And again, they can catch fire, they can spread, and they don't want that. So they want to quell it right away. They put that fire out. So it's not really any sweat off a TV station or media platform's brow to no longer show episode X or episode Y of some TV show. They don't care. If they remove 1 or 2 episodes out of syndication, they're still making money, and everybody else is still getting paid. So it's not like, if you, on the other hand, let something like this fester and boil over and become this big social problem, then everybody could be taking a bath and, not doing so well, right? In other words, things could go really, really wrong really, really fast. People are losing jobs. Shows are not able to be produced anymore because they just get canceled. And, that puts a lot of people out of work and stuff. So people who, behind the scenes, the business people who administer this stuff get a lot of hate for not, thinking just with their moral compass on this. But this is business. And business's moral compass, we've seen, doesn't swing the same way that society's does. So, business is mostly, so beyond the fear and the immediate panic of the crisis, there's when I said that this, there's different levels of answer to this. Another level of answer is not just fear, but, the sort of thinking in the medium and long range. 1 or 2 episodes are nothing. It's no big deal. They don't care. And they're not the show creators. The people who make these decisions are not the same people who are producing these shows or fans of the shows even. I mean, some of these people who make these decisions don't particularly like or even watch these shows. So, they kind of don't really have a lot, that kind of moral stake in the equation. To them, it's all about bottom line and numbers and things like that. And then once, of course, these companies started becoming publicly traded, they became responsible to their shareholders. And depending on who the CEO and the board and how they run their show, will depend a great deal on where they're stressing or emphasizing where their profitability is coming from. And if and very few of these companies are thinking too much with what the public like or what the public want. We wouldn't have the quality of television and stuff. Well, then again, we do have the quality of television and stuff because this is what they think the common masses, want to watch. And that's how they program their stations. And this is why, Dick Wolf has ruled NBC's, late night lineup or adult lineup, I guess I could say, for decades. And now that we're seeing, the social pendulum swing away from support for police and for police entertainment, I think Dick Wolf might be out of business before too long, or certainly retooling his operation and I'm talking here about SVU and Law and Order, right, and all the Chicago shows and stuff. So anyway, I've kind of gone on to this rant about television and entertainment and shows and stuff, but it's all part of the picture I'm trying to paint here, I guess, is really where this is all going. So forgive me for rambling, but I did want to give a complete answer to this in the time that I had. So I hope it at least gave you some food for thought. Let me know what you think. Logamug. Having watched a number of your videos, it's clear that for any task the church can have, there is a Sea Org posting for it. What are the most desirable Sea Org postings? Those which people compete the hardest for. Likewise, not including being the chairman of the RTC, what is the closest thing to a comfortable and stress-free post? Conversely, outside of the RPF, what are the least desirable postings? Finally, what is the strangest Sea Org posting? Okay, these are interesting questions. I had never really thought of things in the Sea Org this way. And by the way, being chairman of the board is not necessarily comfortable and stress-free. Miscavige does stress out quite often, but it is the most comfortable position in the Sea Org. That is definitely for sure. So as far as what is the most desirable Sea Org postings, I'm going to say, actually, when I was in the Sea Org, it was going up to int management. It depended a lot on the person's perspective and point of view, because also being an auditor was a pretty cool job. You got sleep most of the time because you had to be awake and stay awake for the session. So they generally weren't working until 2 or 3 in the mornings the way they were all the admin people or the support people or the management people. That we didn't get any breaks like that. If we fell asleep at our desks, it was, slap you in the head and wake up and get back to work. You can't do that with an auditor in an auditing session. They have to be, good to go for the most part. And if they're not, they're going to make mistakes. It's going to come out and it's going to become a problem. So that was a fairly desirable post if you had any kind of urge to help people individually. If you didn't, then it was torture because you're stuck in a room for 8 hours a day. But if you were at all interested in, in trying to help people out, then that was a thing to do. But also for the administrative side of things, getting up to int management was super, super desirable because that was supposed to be Scientology heaven. It was supposed to be the place where, we all know how bad David Miscavige is and how his inner circle is terrified and how it's just an abuse fest. But that information that we all know is tightly controlled within the world of Scientology to the point where most people in the Sea Org believe, or at least when I was there they did, that international management was just the most standard, rigorous, most wonderful place. I mean, rigorous in terms of rigorous application of L. Ron Hubbard's policies and tech, right? What he said to do was supposed to be supposedly followed to the letter like no other place ever. And everybody who ever came down from Int management and spoke to us would talk about it in these glowing terms, which, of course, we all know they've been told they better talk about it in glowing terms or it's going to be, the RPF the whole or worse for them. So we all thought, desirability-wise, that getting up there was the cream of the crop. It really didn't even matter what you were going to do because there were so many cool things to do up there between music mixing and video editing and graphic design and art and making films. I mean, every aspect of making a film is there, plus international management, overseeing the strategies and programs for the whole world. I mean, man, if you wanted to actually feel like you were doing something effective to change the conditions using Scientology, change the conditions of the planet, then Int management was the place you wanted to go, So that was, I learned after getting out. Oh, man, was I glad that I wasn't qualified to go there. Now, the other thing you said, what's the most comfortable and stress-free post? Okay, this might or might not surprise you, but I think my answer is going to be a letter registrar. And this is a letter writer, basically. It's somebody who sits all day long, usually in a basement floor facility or place in Big Blue. The letter regs are all down in the basements. At Flag, I imagine it's the same. They might have an office. And it's just writing letters to prospective Scientologists or people who have bought services. It's not cold letters. It's not like send them out to the phone book. It's if a person has ever bought a Scientology book or service of any kind, you've got their name and address. And if you don't have it, you skip trace it and you find it, and then you send them a letter and you say, hey, haven't heard from you in a long time, blah, blah, blah. And all you got to do is write those kind of letters all day and respond to letters that are written back to you. And this also, of course, would include emails now, too. And it's all kept on this, kind of computerized central database sales system now, but it's still pretty chill job. Now, I'm not talking about doing any of the direct sales or the phone call sales. This is writing letters. Okay, and this is classically old people work. The senior citizens of the Sea Org are almost uniformly put onto letter writing detail, and this is what they spend their time doing. So, so that's that. And then in terms of outside the RPF, what are the least desirable postings? Being in the galley was always considered a punishment. Being in the estates division, which meant you were on the grounds, you were a groundskeeper, or you were, an engineer type. The engineers tended to be considered a little more higher skilled and specialized training, so we didn't really think of them in the same degraded way that we did the dishwashers or the people who were cooking the food and stuff. A lot of people would be busted from Int management and end up in the galley. And, you couldn't even talk to them about what they had been busted for. It was all, hush hush. But apparently they'd screwed up so bad that they got the straight, direct route to the lowest, scummiest job. So that's how we used to think about it, at least in PAC. And then you asked, what's the strangest Sea Org posting? For me, I'm going to say, because it really struck me as odd that this was a thing, but of course it would have to be, would be caretaking one of the L. Ron Hubbard house properties or special properties. And for example, his home in South Africa was purchased and restored. The home in Arizona was purchased and restored. The CST, the Church of Spiritual Technology properties, have homes where there are Sea Org caretakers there on those properties out in Trementia, out in New Mexico. So there are Sea Org members. I think a couple usually, literally a married couple is usually what's posted out there because you need two people. And they have to keep the place up, do the tours, et cetera, et cetera. So not that there's tours of the CST facilities, but the houses are sort of presented as little museums that the public can make schedules and go and tour. So that's a kind of weird one, right? But that's Sea Org. That's not staff. So there you go. Chase Robertson. Do Scientologists think they will develop psychic powers by following LRH's teachings? What do they think of outsiders, non-Scientologists, who claim to be psychic? Anything else you could add to this topic? Thank you for doing your show. Hey, Chase, thanks. And yes, Scientologists very definitely believe that they will develop psychic powers using Scientology or by, going up the levels of Scientology. I myself used to play a game with my mom when I was a kid. She actually sort of taught me this, and we started doing it. And it was literally like staring at each other and trying to perceive each other's mental image pictures, like telepathy. And sometimes we would guess right, and sometimes we'd guess wrong, but we'd sit there and not like in two chairs just facing each other. We usually did this while we were washing the dishes. And I thought it was kind of a fun game. It was like this telepathy game, So this was something that I was raised with the idea of, is that I could, have this psychic connection with people. And it was funny because for years I used to, really want that psychic connection with people I had fallen in love with, who I was a couple with, right? A girlfriend or whatever, or my wife. And it never really seemed to manifest. And I was always like, that kind of sucks. Sometimes you have that, oh, this person's about to call and then the phone rings thing. And that would happen with my mom through my whole life. And it kind of, I don't know, it kind of started with that game, is how I've always thought of it. I am sure I am full of it on this entire thing. I think it's kind of hilarious that I laugh at myself about all this, but I'm talking about it so you'll get an idea of how somebody brought up in Scientology might think about it, which is that it's a legit thing, that because we're spirits, we can communicate to each other directly, and we don't have to go through bodies. So yeah, this is definitely a belief in Scientology. Then in terms of outsiders claiming to be psychic, kind of the same thing. Like anybody could be, because we're all thetans, we're all spirits. So we've all got latent abilities. And Hubbard talked about how people can randomly remember things from their past or have certain abilities and not even be aware of what the ability is or how they have it. But, we would explain it in terms of a thetan. And energy flows and pictures and, Hubbard's terminology. Other fields and ideas use other terms, but the idea that there could be psychics and that they could be legit, absolutely, Scientologists believe that. That doesn't mean they're going to believe every Tom, Dick, and Harry or Cleo who says that they are a psychic, and especially when they're selling their services. Scientologists don't really go in for that too much. But I could see a Scientologist going to visit a fortune teller or seeing a psychic and sort of, maybe there's a problem and they want to, get some help with it or something. I could see that happening, even though I never heard about anybody doing that I remember when I was in Scientology. So yeah, that's I think that's a decent coverage of it. It's not just psychic telepathy that Scientologists believe in too. They believe at the ultimate levels that telekinesis could be a thing, clairvoyance, clairaudience, in terms of predicting the future, or distant perception, remote viewing, things like that. Those are all beliefs that Scientologists hold are real, literal possibilities. Blake Nestle. Perhaps you've seen the recent episode wherein former recording artist Nick Cannon went on a rant that wouldn't have been too out of place on the front page of the Daily Stormer. Perhaps you've also seen how actor Terry Crews was lambasted for a tweet calling for unity. Are you worried about the seeming establishment of an ideological orthodoxy around ethnicity/race and the litany of other subjects? Does the attempt at Orwellian redefinition of terms regarding the concept of racism concern you? Prominent societal figures sign a letter condemning cancel culture and are in turn targeted for cancellation. The only moderate voice at the New York Times resigns, citing an ideologically hostile environment as the primary reason. Do all of these occurrences and their implications on practically all discourse not terrify you? How can we find beneficial solutions if a massive chunk of America is gaslit into having the tough conversations, then societally ruined for any dissenting opinion? Okay, thanks, Blake, for the rundown on this. And, obviously there are a lot of opinions all over the spectrum on these issues. And there isn't really, and a lot of the questions you're asking me here are not right, wrong, fact, versus fact type of answers. Although people with very strong opinions about these things, myself included, will stand by their principles or morality or the worldview, which is really an amalgamation or collection of a lot of different factors. And they will take their positions based on their own experience of things and decide whether this is a calamity in the making or whether this is just business as usual and the usual give and take of the diversity of marketplace of ideas that we have now so firmly established and so loudly established on social media, which is, kind of now everybody's sort of id is right there in the public eye, at least as far as people who are contributing to offering up their comments and ideas and opinions about things. Do I think it's, sort of an end of the world scenario where we're seeing the end of free speech? No, I don't think that at all. I really, really don't. In fact, the fact that we're still debating all of this so hotly, that the pendulum is swinging back and forth because it swung toward cancel culture and the desire to take people out who are not producing right think and right speech. That pendulum is swinging back the other direction now to the point that that's now being seriously called into question at the highest levels of intelligentsia and academia now. And that's to be expected. It's a pendulum that swings back and forth in our society as things trend in different directions. This is something we've been debating and talking about for literally centuries. I mean, you can go all the way back to John Stuart Mill's classic treatise on free speech, which is called On Liberty, and an amazing piece of work, which anybody who's interested in this topic really must read, because it's sort of the foundational text for modern, Western thinking on free speech. And anyway, I'm not going to answer this with a whole huge, my own treatise on free speech. I'm just going to say that it's because of the fact to me that it's still a topic of hot debate and flying attitudes as expressed all over the spectrum. I think that this is still a totally hot issue, and that means that freedom of speech is still hot and heavy, and we've all got the right and are still using it. And yes, different platforms we run into every day that have, questions and consequences and concerns. And free speech does have consequences, by the way. You're not going to be free from cancel culture of some kind. In other words, consequences. But those consequences can be taken too far. And I think that's the protest that we're seeing from the bulk of society now. And that's a good thing, and this is, again, to be expected in the push and pull and give and take of things. Now, the Nick Cannon thing, I wanted to bring this up also for another reason entirely, and I thought this was kind of interesting. If you guys don't know about this, I'm not going to do a whole rundown on it here, except to say Nick Cannon is a rapper and actor and artist, and he had a podcast or has a podcast. I think Viacom fired him now, although he's still got work, and he's got a talk show that's been pushed forward a year, I think, to give time for things to cool down. But it's kind of interesting. If you pay close attention to this or look into it at all and know what I have said in the past about the Nation of Islam, this is where things get interesting and where it kind of comes into my wheelhouse, because I don't, up until, this week, Nick Cannon to me was a comedian and host of stupid shows and some guy who used to be married to Mariah Carey. I didn't really know anything else about him. And then this thing comes up where he does this podcast and he is basically repeating the ideology, the thinking of the Nation of Islam. And I immediately went, what is this? He was talking about, if I might interpret rather than re-quote everything he said, like I said, I don't want to do a whole huge thing on this. I just want to say that him pointing out that the Jews are not the true Semitic people, that the black people are. That was his assertion on his podcast. This was taken as grossly anti-Semitic, and I get it. And from, certainly from the position of the people who have been calling themselves, Semitic for centuries now, I could see why there would be a problem there. But the Nation of Islam, philosophy, if we go back to my podcast on that and go into their mythology, they believe that they are the true Semites, and there's a lot more to their litany than that. But this is Farrakhan talk. And I thought to myself, has Nick Cannon has he joined the Nation of Islam? Is that what's happening here? Because apparently this is now coming up as a bit of a thing, that there are black artists who are speaking up in this sort of what's perceived as this anti-Semitic, disgusting way. Well, turns out, according to an article I found on the Daily Beast from just 3 days ago, we're talking about Ice Cube, Nick Cannon, Diddy, the Jacksons, Stephen and Deshaun, and even beloved black author Alice Walker have spouted age-old anti-Semitic talking points, usually by quoting known bigot Louis Farrakhan. Okay. And if you don't know who Louis Farrakhan is, he's the head of or leader of the Nation of Islam, the black religious group that is partnered with the Church of Scientology. Okay, this is like so crazy how this circles around to me, right? I mean, talk about 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So on his podcast, Cannon spoke to fellow anti-Semitic conspiracist Professor Giff, formerly of Public Enemy, and this guy Professor Giff was kicked out of Public Enemy and then got back in because he was spouting this anti-Jewish stuff. And he agreed with Giff's racist view that Jewish people control media and claiming that Semitic people are black people, so black people cannot also be anti-Semitic. Okay? Now Nick Cannon was dropped by Viacom for his comments. And some football player tweeted out some defense or something and quoted Farrakhan and got in trouble about this too. Okay, so I then Googled Nation of Islam connection, right? Other than quoting Farrakhan, not only is Nick Cannon quoting him, he's actually been attending Farrakhan's speeches in person. There was a 4th of July speech this year, okay? This is a report from 3 days ago, and it says several prominent black celebrities attended anti-Semitic Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan's July 4th public address. And that includes Nick Cannon and former NBA basketball player Steven Jackson, both of whom has been criticized in the past week for making anti-Semitic comments or statements. So where do you think they were indoctrinated into thinking that the Jews are the bad guys and that the blacks are the true Semites and they'll be talking about Jacob next. This is all Nation of Islam rhetoric, and this is Louis Farrakhan. So if you're wondering why I'm so strident sometimes about cultic thinking and how it can infect our environment and affect our airwaves and infect our minds, these are the kind of connections that I come across all the time. So I thought this might be over long and I might be getting into, whatever, that some things you guys might not be interested in, but I found it fascinating that the dots connected so immediately and so quickly. Because I had no idea, like I said, anything about Nick Cannon just a few days ago, and I certainly didn't know that he'd been attending events with Louis Farrakhan. Nick Cannon could be joining Scientology tomorrow, guys. It's that stupid and silly, these connections and how this actually works. These are dots that do connect. This isn't weird conspiracy theory stuff. So, is Ice Cube going to become a Scientologist? Maybe. These are, pretty wild, right? Anyway, so thought you guys might find that interesting. I sure did. And as for Blake, as far as the, I know you're very concerned about these things, and honestly, so am I, which is why I speak about them on my podcast and on my shows. How can we find beneficial solutions, you ask, if a massive chunk of America is gaslit into having the tough conversations and then societally ruined for expressing their opinions? That is true. If that were the case, then we would be having much tougher issues. What we have is we have different levels of victimization going on at the hands of the media or social media and social media mobs. Some people's lives have truly been upended, and they have had to hit the reset button in an extremely significant way because of Twitter mobs. That's a fact. J.K. Rowling is not going to be one of those people. You know, she's not in that list. Just because she gets a lot of pushback against something that she's saying on transgender issues doesn't mean that she's being canceled. And this is where we get the hyperbole of the masses that also enters into this, which is why, and the sort of fluidity of these terms, and why, you know, societal trends are constantly morphing and changing right in front of our eyes, literally as we're talking about them. So I can say something about this right now that's true for a certain level of this, but wouldn't be true, and therefore you guys could find examples and go, well, that's not true because of blah, blah, blah. And I'd have to say, well, those are true examples that are true at a different level. You see, there's different levels to it. So you have the J.K. Rowling level where she's not being canceled. And then you have the Brett Weinstein level where he was, you know, gotten rid of out of Evergreen College. State College, you know, through public protest, through the mobs, and that's what happened to him, right? And there are others who have lost their jobs, lost their livelihood through, you know, mob action. So we can go to that level and say, yes, that happened, and then we can go to these other levels where people are saying that's what's happening, but it's not really the same thing at all. You see what I mean? So that, you know, this is what I mean by levels or the spectrums of this. So given that being the case, and the fact that society's changing its attitudes as we progress through time, I think what we're seeing is what I described earlier, is this pendulum swinging of trends, and we're seeing the pendulum swing against the Twitter mob mentality now, whereas it used to be all in on that, until people kind of got their head on straight and realized that mobs don't think well, and that the consequences of mob mentality is always uniformly destructive. So not so good, right? And those are some comments on that. I hope I'm offering some food for thought more so than trying to give you a definitive answer of this is how it is, because I'm not Rush Limbaugh. And I'm not Schenkjaeger or Yinger. I'm just, you know, I want you guys to think as much as I'm thinking about this stuff. And I hope I'm partially succeeding in doing that and giving you this answer. Thanks for asking, Blake. Alyssa, there's a black and white photo of L. Ron Hubbard with what I'm guessing is a tomato plant connected to some electrical device. What the heck is he doing, and when was this? Thanks for the question, Alyssa. This was in 1959, 1960 at St. Hill Manor in East Grinstead in Sussex, England, where L. Ron Hubbard had established at that time his new home there at the St. Hill Manor. And Hubbard claimed he was researching life, the quality of life itself, and trying to determine whether plant life or cellular life is different from human life, for example. You know, and he said that it wasn't. When you're talking in the spiritual realm, you can pretty much make any claim you want, and nobody can really prove you wrong. So Hubbard's, you know, claims don't really get refuted. But his work with the tomato plant, where what he had was an E-meter, that's an electropsychometer, and he had it plugged in. He had a couple of electrodes pushed into a tomato, and it was a live tomato. So he was asking it questions or seeing what kind of responses were occurring. And if you think that a plant can understand you, you got bigger problems. Now, I remember when I was a kid that there was family friends of ours who had messed around with an E-meter in a plant one day, and they had hooked it up to a plant. They were asking it questions. They snapped a leaf. That got a big response. I was like, yeah, I'll bet it did. You know, because it's just, again, remember, the E-meter is only measuring changes in electrical resistance. So if you go breaking the fronds or stems or roots or whatever of a plant, you're definitely going to be changing some electrical resistance. And that doesn't mean the plant is talking to you. You know. So anyway, I'm so amused by the whole concept now. I can't stop laughing about it. But when I was in Scientology, I took this stuff seriously. I thought that Hubbard was onto something, and that life was run by or animated by this quantity called theta, of which thetans were part or were somehow a division of. See, Hubbard was never totally super clear on this, except to say there was some division, that us as individuals were not part of a collective whole, that we were individuals, and yet we were made up of this thing called theta, this quantity or quality, and all of life was animated by that quality. And that's what I can say about that. That sounds somewhat sensible. Hubbard was an interesting character. Okay, guys, I got over my laughing. So thank you very much for watching the show this week. Really appreciate your viewership and support. If you are enjoying the show, if you want to get your questions at the top of the queue, if you want to support me and what I'm doing here, please join me on Patreon or use PayPal. Links are below in the description section to this and every video I have produced out there. All right, guys, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.